He didn't just scold me, he grounded me, at 34 years old, in front of 30 relatives who laughed like it was a holiday game show. My dad smiled like a man who had finally trained his daughter to sit pretty and stay quiet. Then he went to bed thinking the story was over. But the next morning, he opened my bedroom door and found nothing. No suitcase, no coat, and definitely no me. My name is Melody Walker. To the rest of the world, I was a 34-year-old forensic accountant who managed risk for multinational corporations, owned a condo in Philadelphia, and paid my taxes a week early, but inside the walls of my father's showpiece estate in Pine Hollow, Pennsylvania, those credentials evaporated. Here, I was not an adult woman with a career. I was the family screw-up, the one who refused to orbit the burning sun that was Derek Walker's ego. The holiday gathering was in full swing, and the noise was deafening. My father loved these oversized events. He collected relatives like he collected vintage cars, polishing them up and lining them up to reflect his own success back at him. There were at least 30 people crammed into the open-concept living room, a space that cost more to renovate than most people earned in a decade. The air smelled of expensive pine candles and roasted meat, thick with the humidity of too much forced laughter. I stood near the edge of the room, clutching a glass of sparkling water like a shield. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. Around me, cousins I had not seen in 3 years were recording videos on their phones, their ring lights reflecting off the bay windows. My brother, Mason, was holding court by the fireplace, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost $600, mimicking our father's posture perfectly. I watched my father, Derek, move through the crowd. At 62, he was still handsome in a predatory way, with silver hair coiffed to perfection and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was telling a story he had told 1,000 times, performing authority like it was a competitive sport. He paused for laughter, and the room obeyed on cue. They were trained well. I had been waiting for 2 hours for a private moment, but I realized that in this house, privacy was a myth. Derek Walker did not do private. He did spectacles. I took a breath, stepped away from the wall, and walked into the center of the room. The conversation lulled slightly as I approached him. He turned, a glass of scotch in his hand, his eyebrows raising in mock surprise. "Melody," he said, his voice booming enough to silence the back of the room. "Decided to join the family finally? You have been lurking in the corner like a ghost." A few ants chuckled. Mason smirked from the fireplace. I kept my voice even. "I need to ask you something, Dad." "Ask away," he said, spreading his arms wide. "We are all family here. No secrets in the Walker house, right?" He was baiting me. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to get emotional so he could dismiss me as hysterical. I was not going to give him that satisfaction. "It has been 3 months since Grandma June passed," I said. The room went dead silent. Mentioning Grandma was off script. "I have not received any notification about the probate or the will. Did Grandma leave anything to me, or did you already handle it?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's smile froze, then slowly shifted into something sharper, something dangerous. He looked at Mason, then back at me, shaking his head with exaggerated disappointment. "Unbelievable," Derek said, and he pitched his voice so that even the cousins in the hallway could hear. "We are celebrating the holidays. We are trying to be a family, and here comes Melody, with her hand out. I am not asking for money, Dad," I said, keeping my spine straight. "I am asking for information. Grandma told me. Grandma was sick. Melody," he snapped, cutting me off. He took a step toward me, using his height to loom. She was 84 years old. She was confused. "And frankly, it is disgusting that you are bringing this up now. You did not even cry at the funeral." That was a lie. I had cried for 3 days straight. Just not in front of him. I never gave him my grief to consume. "I am asking a simple question," I repeated, refusing to back down. Derek laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He turned to the crowd, gesturing at me like I was a prop in his monologue. Look at this, 34 years old, and still acting like a spoiled teenager. You think because you have your little job in the city, you can come here and interrogate me? In my house? It is a reasonable question, I said. It is disrespectful, he roared. The charm was gone, replaced by the tyrant who had ruled my childhood. You have always been this way, ungrateful, selfish. Mason does not ask these questions. Mason respects the legacy. But you just want to know what you can grab. I want to know what she wanted, I said quietly. He stared at me, his face reddening. He was losing control of the narrative, and he hated it. He needed to crush me, and he needed to do it in a way that asserted his absolute dominance. He needed to infantilize me. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes narrowing. You know what? I am done with this attitude. I am done with you ruining this night. He pointed a finger at the ceiling. Dad turned it into a spectacle, and the house swallowed my name like a joke. I didn't argue. I just watched, because I'd already started counting exits. The silence of that September morning was heavy, the kind that presses against your eardrums before the world wakes up. It was 6:12 in the morning when my phone vibrated against the nightstand. A harsh, buzzing insect in the gray light. I knew before I even looked at the screen. Nobody calls at 6:12 in the morning with good news. The voice on the other end was professional, detached, and apologetic. St. Briar Medical Center, cardiac arrest. It was quick, they said. She did not suffer. They said, as if the lack of pain made the absence of her presence any less violent. Grandma June was gone. 84 years of sharp wit, hidden kindness, and steel spine, extinguished in a sterile room while I was sleeping 3 hours away. I drove to the hospital in a trance, the highway a blur of gray asphalt and red taillights. When I arrived, the air in the waiting room tasted like stale coffee and industrial cleaner. I expected to find a scene of devastation. I expected to find my father weeping, or my mother in shock. Instead, I found a boardroom meeting. Dad was standing near the nurse's station, wearing a suit that looked suspiciously crisp for someone who had just lost his mother. He was not holding a tissue. He was holding his phone, speaking in that low, authoritative baritone he reserved for closing deals. We need the obituary drafted by noon, Derek was saying, pacing a tight circle on the linoleum. I want the focus on the community work, the legacy, and get the florist on the line. The one we used for the gala last year. We need lilies, hundreds of them. He saw me approach, and for a second, I thought he might hug me. I thought he might drop the performance and just be a son who had lost his mother. But he just nodded, tapping his watch. You made it, he said, as if I were late for a quarterly review. Mason is handling the paperwork with the administration. Pull yourself together. Melody, we have people looking at us. I looked at him, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Grandma just died. Dad, who is looking at us? Everyone, he snapped, turning back to his phone. Optics, Melody, optics. Mason walked out of the administration office a moment later. At 37, my brother was a carbon copy of our father, stripped of the charm and left with only the ambition. He was holding a clipboard, clicking a pen rhythmically against the metal clip. Death certificate is being processed, Mason said, not even looking at me. I told them to expedite the release. We need to get the announcement out before the market closes. It might affect the local holdings. I stood there, invisible in the space between their strategy and their schedule. They were not burying a mother or a grandmother. They were managing an asset transition. The memorial service 3 days later was exactly what Derek wanted. A masterpiece of theater. The chapel was packed with the town's elite, council members, business partners, people who knew Derek Walker but had likely never had a real conversation with June Walker. I sat in the front row, wearing black, feeling like an intruder at my own grief. Dad stood at the podium, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight he had undoubtedly requested. He spoke for 20 minutes. He spoke about Walker resilience. He spoke about the pillars of the community. He told anecdotes that painted Grandma as a silent, supportive figure who existed solely to propel the men in her life forward. Mother understood that legacy is built by the strong, Dad boomed, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. She raised me to lead. She raised Mason to follow in those footsteps. She was proud of the sons who carry the name. He looked at Mason, who nodded solemnly from the pew. He never said my name, not once. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, realizing that in his version of the story, I did not exist. I was a footnote, a glitch in the lineage. After the service, the reception was a blur of handshakes and murmurs. I stood by the refreshment table, watching my father hold court, accepting condolences like they were awards. That was when I felt a presence beside me. She hated lilies, a voice said softly. I turned to see a man I recognized but did not know. Graham Sutter. He was older than my father, with eyes that had seen too many legal battles to be surprised by anything. He held a glass of water, looking at the room with a detached curiosity. "Excuse me?" I asked. "Your grandmother," Graham said, turning to look at me. She hated lilies, said they smelled like funerals. She preferred wild sunflowers. He extended a hand. His grip was warm, dry, and firm. "I am Graham Sutter," he said. "I have been your father's attorney for 20 years. "I know who you are," I said, wary. "Are you here to tell me I'm standing in the wrong spot, or that my dress is not appropriate for the brand?" Graham smiled, a small, genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "No, I am just paying my respects. Your grandmother told me I would recognize you. She said you have the only honest eyes in the family." He held my gaze for a second longer than was professional, communicating something I could not quite read. Then he nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of black suits. That night, I stayed at my parents' house. It was expected. To leave would have been a scene, and I did not have the energy for a scene. I retreated to my old bedroom, the same room I would be grounded in months later. The house was quiet. Finally, the performance was over for the day. I lay on the twin bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a grief so profound it felt like physical weight. I missed her laugh. I missed the way she would sneak me chocolate when Dad was lecturing me about calories. I missed the only person in this family who saw me. I sat up, unable to sleep. I walked over to the bookshelf in the corner. It was filled with the books I had read as a teenager. Yearbooks, novels, textiles books. My hand brushed against a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a first edition, a gift from Grandma when I graduated college. Dad had called it a waste of money. Grandma had called it a necessary education. I pulled it off the shelf, just wanting to hold something she had given me. As I opened the cover, a thick white envelope slid out and fell to the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. The envelope was sealed, but my name was written on the front in Grandma's shaky, distinctive cursive. Melody. I sat on the floor, my hands trembling as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal paper and several photocopied documents. The note was short. It was dated 2 weeks before she died. "My dearest Melody, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the sharks are already circling. I know you, honey. You are going to want to be polite. You are going to want to keep the peace. Don't. Men like your father only hear documents. They do not hear pleas, and they do not hear tears. He thinks everything I have is his by right. He is wrong. Don't show anyone, not even your mother. She has forgotten how to fight him. But you haven't. Graham knows. Trust Graham. But only when you are ready to burn it down. Love. Grandma." I stared at the words, tears finally spilling over. She knew. She had watched the same play I had, and she had written a new ending. I looked at the photocopies behind the note. They were fragments, but they were enough. A deed transfer, a trust amendment, a beneficiary designation that explicitly excluded Derek Walker from controlling the primary estate. The date on the trust amendment was from 5 years ago. My father had spent the last 5 years strutting around this town, bragging about his inheritance, borrowing against a future he did not own. Grandma had not just left me money. She had left me a weapon. She had planned for his betrayal because she knew his character better than anyone. I slept with the envelope under my pillow, my hand clutching the paper so tight my knuckles turned white. The next morning, the house was silent. It was barely dawn. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun not yet crested over the hills. I packed my bag quietly. I did not go to the kitchen to make coffee. I did not write a thank you note for the hospitality. I walked down the stairs, the steps groaning softly under my weight. I passed the study where my father was likely already awake. Plotting his next move, calculating the value of the estate he believed was his. I walked out the front door and closed it softly behind me. I did not say goodbye. In the Walker family, words were just noise. Silence was the first weapon I had ever truly owned, and as I started my car and drove away from the house that was built on leverage and lies, I knew exactly how I was going to use it. My life at Harbor Point Compliance and Forensics was built on a simple, brutal truth. Everyone leaves a trace. It did not matter how clever the CFO was, or how buried the shell company seemed to be in the Cayman Islands. If money moved, it left a wake. My job was to follow that wake, find the leak, and plug it before the ship went down. I was good at it. I was ruthless with details in a way that terrified junior associates and delighted senior partners. Yet, to Derek Walker, I was nothing more than a glorified secretary. He liked to tell his golf buddies that I was in administration, a vague, dismissive term that stripped away the 6 years of specialized training and the CPA license I had earned while working 2 jobs. He had poured nearly $200,000 into Mason's law school tuition, framing it as an investment in the family brand. When I asked for help with my certification fees, he had laughed and told me that paper pushing did not require a handout. I carried that shame like a tax. I paid it every time I visited home, shrinking myself down to fit the small, incompetent shape they had carved out for me, but in my office on the 42nd floor, overlooking the steel-gray waters of the harbor. I was not small. I was a weapon. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of day that felt like it was made of gray wool. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the office was quiet, save for the hum of the HVAC system and the rhythmic clicking of keyboards. I was deep in a forensic audit for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company that had lost $3 million in inventory. Cross-referencing shipping manifests with warehouse logs, my email pinged. A single sharp notification sound that cut through my focus. I glanced at the second monitor. The sender was Mason Walker. My stomach tightened. Mason never emailed me during the workday. If he wanted something, he texted. If he wanted to brag, he called when he knew I was busy. An email meant formalities. An email meant documentation. I clicked on the notification. The subject line made the blood drain from my face. Estate restructure / beneficiary revision. Draft 5-4. I froze. My hand hovered over the mouse. This was not addressed to me. I looked at the recipients. It was sent to Derek Walker and Graham Sutter, but there, buried in the CC field, was my email address. It was a slip, a careless autofill error. Mason had likely typed M intended for mother, or perhaps an internal paralegal named Melissa, and the mail client had populated Melody instead. He had hit send without checking. He had just handed me the smoking gun. I did not open the attachment immediately. I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked around the office. My colleague, Sarah, was on a call 3 desks away, laughing about her weekend. The world was spinning on its axis, completely unaware that my brother had just declared war. I opened the email. The body of the text was short, professional, and devastatingly cruel. Dad, attached is the revised language for the filing. We have shifted the primary assets, including the Pine Hollow property and the endowment, into the new LLC structure under your sole control. As discussed, we are characterizing Melody's exclusion not as a disinheritance, but as a protective measure. I scrolled down. The legal language was polished, sterile, and designed to bury me alive. due to the beneficiary's history of financial instability and emotional volatility. The trustees deem it necessary to restrict access to capital to prevent mismanagement, instability, volatility. They were painting me as a liability. They were constructing a legal narrative where I was not a victim of theft, but a patient in need of protection. Then I read the final line of Mason's email, the one that made the air leave my lungs. Graham is pushing back on the notification clause, but I told him not to worry. She won't fight it. She never does. She never does. I stared at those 3 words. They danced on the screen, mocking me. They were right. Historically, Melody Walker did not fight. She apologized. She retreated. She accepted the scraps and said thank you. But they did not know Melody Walker, the forensic accountant. They knew the daughter. They did not know the auditor. I did not cry. The grief I had felt in September had calcified into something harder, something colder. I felt a sudden, icy clarity wash over me. I moved fast. In my line of work, we knew that digital evidence was volatile. Emails could be recalled, servers could be wiped, logs could be altered. I took a screenshot of the email, capturing the timestamp, the headers, and the distribution list. I saved it to my encrypted personal drive. Then I saved it to a USB drive I kept on my keychain. I opened the attachment. It was 40 pages of dense legal jargon. I scanned it with the eyes of a predator. I looked for the cracks. I looked for the lies. And there it was, on page 12. Property located at 4402 Oak Lane, currently leveraged as collateral for the business loan dated October 4th. I stopped breathing. The date was October 4th. That was 2 weeks after Grandma died. The house, my grandmother's house, the one she had promised me, was protected. Derek had already leveraged it. He had taken out a loan against a property he did not legally own yet, likely forging a consent form or misrepresenting his authority as executor before the probate was even opened. This was not just cruelty. This was fraud. He was gambling with the estate because he was broke. That was the only reason a man like Derek Walker, who prided himself on liquidity, would leverage a family heirloom so quickly. He needed cash, and he needed it fast. I hit print, the laser printer in the corner whirred to life. I printed 2 copies of the email and 2 copies of the attachment. I walked over to the machine, watching the pages slide out, warm and crisp. I held them in my hands, feeling the weight of the betrayal. It was heavy, but it was tangible. I walked back to my desk and put the papers in a secure folder. Then I picked up my phone. I had Graham Sutter's business card taped to the inside of my notebook, hidden behind a calendar. I had stared at it a dozen times in the last 2 months, wondering if Grandma was right, wondering if he was truly an ally or just another man on Derek's payroll. Mason's email said Graham was pushing back. That was the signal I needed. I dialed the number. It was a direct line, not the main switchboard. It rang once, twice. Law office. A woman's voice answered. She sounded efficient, guarded. "This is Melody Walker," I said. My voice was steady, void of the trembling daughter I used to be. "I need to speak with Graham Sutter." I expected resistance. I expected to be asked for a reference number, or told he was in a meeting, or transferred to a voicemail that would never be checked. I expected the wall of silence that usually surrounded my father's affairs. Instead, the line went quiet for a heartbeat. I could hear the faint scratch of a pen on paper. "Ms. Walker," the receptionist said. Her tone shifted. It wasn't the polite dismissal I was used to. It was something else. Recognition, respect. "He is in a deposition, but he left strict instructions," she said. "Instructions?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Yes," she said. "He said that if you called, I was to interrupt him immediately. He has been expecting you." A chill went down my spine. He knew. He knew about the email. Or maybe he just knew that eventually Derek would push too hard, and I would finally push back. "Put him on," I said. I looked at the computer screen, at the words, "She never does." "I am ready to fight," I whispered to the empty office, and for the first time in 34 years, I meant it. Graham Sutter's office was not what I expected. Given my father's taste for glass towers and marble lobbies, I assumed his attorney would operate out of a similar fortress of ego. Instead, the address Graham gave me led to a brownstone on the quiet side of town. Nestled between a dentist's office and a rare bookstore, there was no gold plaque, just a modest wooden sign with his name. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The walls were lined with locked filing cabinets. Not art. It felt like a vault. I sat in a leather chair that had clearly seen decades of use. Across the desk, Graham Sutter watched me with the same steady gaze he had used at the funeral. He did not offer me coffee or small talk. He simply opened a thick file folder and placed it in the center of the desk. "You look like her," Graham said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation. June had that same way of sitting, like she was ready to bolt or ready to fight. "I am not here to talk about my resemblance. Graham," I said, keeping my voice professional, "I am here because my father is leveraging assets he does not own, and my brother is drafting legal documents that paint me as mentally incompetent." Graham leaned back, tenting his fingers. "I know." "You know?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "You are his lawyer. You represent Derek Walker." "I represent the Walker estate," Graham corrected, his tone sharpening. "And before I ever shook Derek Walker's hand, I represented June Walker for 40 years. I wrote her first will when your father was still trying to figure out how to tie a Windsor knot. I am not Derek's lawyer." Melody. "I am the firewall June built to keep him from burning everything down." I stared at him. The narrative I had lived with my whole life, that Dad was the sun and everyone else just orbited him, shifted. Grandma had been playing a longer game. Graham tapped the file. "Your grandmother knew this day would come. She knew Derek would try to consolidate power the moment she was gone. That is why she did not just leave a will. She created a protected estate plan, a trust structure that is ironclad." He flipped open the file. It was organized with military precision. "Let's start with the assets," Graham said. "Asset number 1, the Walker Family Education Endowment. It is currently held at Ridgeway Trust and Savings." "Dad says he is moving that to a new LLC," I said. "He wants to manage the investments himself." "He can't," Graham said flatly. "That endowment is an irrevocable trust. It was established 20 years ago to ensure that any Walker grandchild, you, Mason, and any future children, would have access to tuition and startup capital. The trust documents explicitly state that the funds cannot be commingled with personal accounts and cannot be managed by any beneficiary. Derek is a beneficiary," I said, catching on. "Exactly," Graham said. "He has no legal standing to touch the principal. If he tries to move it, the bank freezes the account automatically." He turned the page. "Asset number 2, he continued. "The house in Pine Hollow." I felt a pang in my chest. "Dad's house." "It is not Dad's house," Graham said, his voice dropping an octave. "It never was. Your grandmother bought that land 45 years ago. She built the house. When Derek moved his family in, she allowed it, but she kept the deed in a life estate trust. Derek has the right to live there, yes, but he does not have the right to sell it. He does not have the right to leverage it against business loans, and he certainly does not have the right to kick you out of it." My mind raced back to the email I had intercepted. "Property located at 4402 Oak Lane, currently leveraged as collateral." "He already did," I said. "Or he is trying to." Graham's expression did not change, but his eyes grew colder. "We will get to that. But first, asset number 3. This is the one that matters most." He slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a nomination of trustee form, signed by June Walker in blue ink. The date was from last year. "Grandma did not just leave you money. Melody," Graham said softly. "Money runs out. Money can be stolen. She left you something Derek cannot steal. She left you authority." I looked at the document. My name was printed clearly in the line designated for successor trustee. "You are the executor," Graham explained. "Not of the whole estate, but of the specific trust that holds the house and the endowment. Derek receives a stipend, Mason receives a stipend, but the decision-making power, the signature that releases the funds, that belongs to you. The room went silent. I felt the breath leave my lungs. All my life, I had been the child who was sent to her room, the one who was told she was too emotional, too weak, too irresponsible to handle real-world problems. And all this time, Grandma had looked at me and seen a leader. She had handed me the keys to the kingdom and not told a soul, waiting for the moment when I would need them most. "Does he know?" I asked. "He suspects," Graham said. "He has been hounding me for weeks to release the trust documents. I have been stalling, waiting for you to call. But yesterday, he made a move." Graham pulled a document from the bottom of the stack. It was a court filing, an affidavit. "He filed this yesterday morning," Graham said. "It is a petition to bypass the named trustee and appoint himself as emergency administrator." I read the highlighted paragraph. The petitioner asserts that the whereabouts of the secondary beneficiary, Melody Walker, are unknown. Despite diligent efforts to locate her, she remains unreachable and has effectively abandoned her interest in the estate. "Unreachable," I whispered. "I live in Philadelphia. He has my number. I was at his house for Thanksgiving last year." "He swore under oath that he could not find you," Graham said. "He is trying to get a judge to grant him emergency powers by default. If you do not show up to contest it, he wins. He gets control of the trust. He leverages the house, and he drains the endowment before you even get a court date." The audacity was breathtaking. It was not just a lie. It was an erasure. He was trying to legally delete me from the family so he could rob his own mother's legacy. "He thinks I will not fight," I said. "He thinks I am just going to fade away." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had printed at work. I slid the email chain across the desk to Graham. "He is right about one thing," I said. "I usually don't fight, but then Mason sent me this." Graham put on a pair of reading glasses and picked up the paper. He read it in silence. I watched his face. I saw the moment he reached the line about me being unstable. I saw the moment he saw the reference to the leveraged property. And I saw the moment he read Mason's dismissal. "She won't fight it." Graham set the paper down. He took off his glasses. His face was pale. His jaw set hard. "This is dated 2 days ago," Graham said. "Yes," I said. "And he discusses leveraging the Pine Hollow property explicitly," Graham said. "Yes." Graham looked at me, and for the first time, the lawyer mask slipped completely. He looked angry, not annoyed, but righteously furious. "Melody, this is not legal strategy," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is fraud. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, and because Mason is a licensed attorney. This is disbarment. They are discussing leveraging an asset they know they do not own, and they are conspiring to mislead a court about your location to do it." "So we have him," I said. "We have enough to bury him," Graham said. "We could go to the police. We could go to the Bar Association." "No," I said. Graham looked at me, surprised. "No?" "Not yet," I said. "I thought about the scene last night, the laughter, the 30 relatives watching me be humiliated, the way Derek had smiled as he sent me to my room like a child. If we went to the police now, it would be a quiet legal battle. Derek would spin it. He would claim it was a misunderstanding. He would play the victim. I needed him to lose in the same arena where he had tried to destroy me. I needed an audience. He called a family meeting for tomorrow morning," I said. 9 o'clock. He wants to announce that he is handling the estate. He wants to perform for the family." I looked at Graham. "I want to give him his performance," I said. "I want you to walk in there with me. I want you to bring the original trust documents. I want you to bring the affidavit where he lied about not finding me. And I want you to read the truth to him in front of everyone he tried to impress." Graham looked at me for a long moment. Then, a slow, sharp smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting 20 years to settle a debt. 9 o'clock, Graham said. I will bring the briefcase. And Graham? I added, standing up. Yes? When you come in, I said. Don't come in as the family attorney. Come in as his lawyer. Let him think he has won until the very last second. Graham nodded. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I walked out of the office and into the cool autumn air. The dread that had been sitting on my chest for months was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. Derek Walker had spent his whole life building a castle out of glass. Tomorrow, I was going to throw the first stone. We established 2 rules before I left Graham's office. Rule number 1, no threats. We would not warn Derek. We would not hint at legal action. And we would certainly not give him the satisfaction of an argument. Rule number 2, no drama. This was not a reality television show. It was an execution of facts. We would use only documents and witnesses. If you scream, he wins, Graham told me, sliding a fresh notepad across his desk. If you cry, he wins. You have to be a statue, Melody. You have to be the one thing in that house that he cannot manipulate. I can be a statue, I said. I have had 34 years of practice. We spent the next 2 hours building the trap. It felt less like legal prep and more like choreographing a heist. Graham called his contact at Ridgeway Trust and Savings while I sat across from him, listening to the speakerphone. I need a formal confirmation of status, Graham said into the receiver. Not a summary. I need a sworn statement from the compliance officer confirming that Melody Walker is the sole named successor trustee, effective immediately upon the death of June Walker. The voice on the other end hesitated. That is irregular. Mr. Sutter, usually. We just send the standard packet. My client is dealing with a hostile party attempting to leverage assets based on a fraudulent claim of absence, Graham said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. If you do not want Ridgeway attached to a fraud case, I suggest you write the letter. 20 minutes later, the secure fax machine in the corner hummed to life. It spit out a 3-page document on heavy bond paper, signed by the Vice President of Trust Operations. It confirmed everything. I had the power, I had the control, and most importantly, it confirmed that any attempt by Derek Walker to access the funds was unauthorized. Graham took the letter and added it to what he called the clean packet. Legal jargon confuses people, Graham explained, sorting papers into 2 neat stacks. And when people are confused, they look to the loudest person in the room for translation, in your family. That is Derek. We cannot let him translate. So, we make this simple. He held up the packet. It contained only 4 documents: the bank letter, the deed to the house proving Grandma's ownership, the email Mason had sent conspiring to defraud me, and a simple timeline of events printed in large, bold font. When I walk in, Graham said, I am going to read this. It is short, it is brutal, and it is impossible to misunderstand. I need someone inside, I said, thinking of the layout of the living room. Someone who won't just blindly follow Dad's lead. I need a witness who actually sees me. I mentally scanned the roster of relatives. Most were on Dad's payroll or hoping to be, but then I thought of Riley Grant, my cousin on my mother's side. Riley was 26, a quiet observer who spent most family gatherings in the corner, watching the chaos with a raised eyebrow. She never laughed at Dad's jokes unless they were actually funny, which meant she rarely laughed at all. Riley, I said. She notices things. She will be there. Good, Graham said. Make sure she is close to the front. The next phase was the hardest, the return. My father had escalated the event. It was no longer just a holiday brunch. He had sent out a mass text message to the entire extended family, renaming it a mandatory family meeting to discuss the future of the Walker legacy. He was setting the stage. He needed a packed house because he was planning to publicly announce his takeover of the estate. He wanted witnesses to his coronation. I drove back to Pine Hollow the night before the gathering. The house loomed at the end of the driveway, lit up like a cruise ship. I parked my car in the shadows of the garage, away from the main entrance. My stomach turned over, but I forced myself to breathe. Statue, I reminded myself. Be a statue. I entered through the side door. The house was already buzzing with the frenetic energy that always preceded one of Dad's productions. Caterers were setting up tables in the dining room. My mother was nervously arranging flowers, moving a vase 3 inches to the left, then 3 inches to the right. I walked past them, keeping my head down, heading for the stairs. I made it to the landing before I was intercepted. "Melody!" It was Mason. He was leaning against the doorframe of his old room, holding a bottle of beer. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that his expensive moisturizer couldn't hide. He knew the risk he had taken with that email. He was edgy. "You made it," he said, his eyes scanning my face, searching for a crack. "Dad was worried you wouldn't show. He said you have been distant." "I have been working." "Mason," I said. My voice was flat, calm. He pushed off the doorframe and took a step closer, invading my personal space. It was a classic intimidation tactic, one he had learned from Derek. "Look, about tomorrow," Mason said, his voice lowering. "Dad is going to announce some changes, administrative stuff regarding Grandma's accounts. It is technical. I don't want you to get upset or make a scene. It is better if we just let him handle the complexity, right? You know how you get with numbers." The insult was so casual, so rehearsed. "You know how you get with numbers." He was talking to a forensic accountant. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull the folder out of my bag and shove the email he had written down his throat. Instead, I blinked slowly. "I am just here for the brunch. Mason, I am too tired for complexity." Mason exhaled, his shoulders dropping. He bought it. He believed the version of me he had created in his head, the passive, overwhelmed little sister. "Good," he said, taking a sip of his beer. "That is good. Mel, just follow his lead tomorrow. It will be easier for everyone." "I plan to," I said. I walked past him and into my childhood bedroom. I closed the door and locked it. I did not turn on the main light. I moved by the glow of the street lamp outside the window. I unpacked my bag. I took the folder containing the clean packet and slid it under the mattress, right in the center, where no casual search would find it. Then I changed into my pajamas, but I did not get under the covers. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the driveway. I could hear Dad downstairs, his voice booming as he directed the caterers. He sounded manic. He sounded like a man who thought he had already won. He had no idea that the irresponsible daughter upstairs had just planted a landmine in the center of his kingdom. I set the alarm on my phone for 5 a.m. I was not going to be woken up by them. I was not going to be dragged out of bed. When the time came, I would be dressed, armed, and waiting. I picked up my phone and opened my encrypted messaging app. I typed one sentence to Graham Sutter. "If he tries to read his version, walk in." I watched the message status change to delivered, then read. A moment later, a simple thumbs-up emoji appeared on the screen. I put the phone down and looked at the empty room. Tomorrow, they would try to humiliate me. Tomorrow, they would try to ground me. They would treat me like a child and laugh at my expense. Let them laugh, I thought, closing my eyes. It would be the last time they ever did. By noon, the house was vibrating. It wasn't just the noise. It was the sheer, suffocating pressure of 30 people trying to perform happiness in a space designed for intimidation. The relatives arrived in waves, carrying Pyrex dishes covered in aluminum foil and bottles of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. They brought with them a wall of sound, shrill greetings, booming laughs, the clinking of glass, and the heavy, cloying scent of expensive perfume mixing with roasting turkey. I was not greeted as a family member. I was greeted as staff. "Melody, sweetheart, grab this coat, will you?" Aunt Linda said, thrusting a heavy fur into my arms without making eye contact. "And be a dear. Check on the ice. Derek says the bar is running low." I took the coat. I checked the ice. I moved through the crowded foyer like a ghost in my own life, weaving between uncles who clapped each other on the back and cousins who were already comparing year-end bonuses, while I ran back and forth to the kitchen, refilling trays and discarding wrapping paper. My father and brother sat in the living room like kings holding court. Derek had positioned himself in his favorite leather armchair, the one with the high back that made him look like a magistrate. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch. Catching the light just so, Mason sat on the arm of the sofa next to him, mirroring his posture, laughing at the right intervals, nodding with serious intent whenever Dad lowered his voice to discuss strategy. They looked like executives at a board meeting. I looked like the caterer they hadn't bothered to tip. "Melody!" Dad's voice cut through the chatter. He didn't shout. He projected. He had that unique ability to make a room go quiet just by saying a name. I froze near the sideboard, holding a stack of napkins, every head turned. "Come tell Uncle Steve about your little apartment," Dad said, gesturing me over with a flick of his wrist. He turned to Steve, a man who owned 3 car dealerships. "She lives in the city, one of those cozy places." I told her. "Melody, you can't even fit a dining table in there, but she insists on the independence. Right, honey?" The room chuckled. It was a soft, rippling sound. They weren't laughing at the apartment. They were laughing at the implication. Poor Melody. So small. So insignificant. "It is a condo, Dad," I said, keeping my voice even. "And it has 2 bedrooms. 2 bedrooms, Dad roared, slapping his knee. "Hear that? She counts the closet as a bedroom. That is forensic accounting for you, making things look bigger than they are." The laughter grew louder. This was the game. He took my career, a career where I hunted down millions of dollars in fraud, and reduced it to a joke about creative math. He stripped me of my competence so he could wear it as a cape. I looked around the room. I saw my mother near the window, her eyes fixed on a flower arrangement, pretending she hadn't heard. I saw Mason smirking into his drink. I saw Aunt Linda covering her mouth to hide a smile. But then I saw Riley Grant, my cousin on my mother's side, was standing near the bookshelf. She wasn't laughing. She was holding a glass of soda, and her eyes were locked on mine. She didn't look pitying. She looked sharp. I excused myself and retreated to the kitchen to check the oven, a task that didn't exist. I needed a second to breathe. I gripped the cold granite of the island, counting backward from 10. "Statue," I told myself. "Be stone." The swinging door pushed open. It wasn't my mother. It was Riley. She walked over to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter next to me. We didn't hug. We didn't do the fake pleasantries. "He is in rare form today," Riley said quietly. "He has an audience," I replied, not looking at her. "He always performs better with a full house." Riley took a sip of water. She looked toward the door, ensuring no one was listening, then turned her gaze back to me. "I saw you upstairs last night, through the window. You were not sleeping. You were pacing." I stiffened. I hadn't realized the curtains were sheer enough. "I have a lot on my mind," I said. Riley shifted her weight. "I also saw the way you looked at Mason when he made that crack about your car. You didn't look hurt. Mel, you looked ready." She placed the water bottle on the counter. The sound was a soft thud in the quiet kitchen. "I don't know what you are planning," Riley whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "And I don't want to know. Plausible deniability is my favorite holiday tradition, but whatever you are doing, do it clean, because if you miss, he will never let you up off the mat." I looked at her then, really looked at her. "I won't miss." Riley nodded once, a sharp, singular motion. "Good, because I am tired of the show." 2. She turned and walked out, leaving me alone with the turkey and the truth. An hour later, we were seated at the massive dining table. It was mahogany, long enough to seat 20, and Dad sat at the head like a feudal lord. The air was thick with the smell of sage and roasted meat, but the tension was thicker. Dad tapped his spoon against his wine glass. The sharp ding-ding-ding silenced the room instantly. "Before we eat," Dad announced, standing up. He buttoned his jacket, a gesture of formality that signaled a speech was coming. I wanted to take a moment. We all know this is our first holiday without June. A murmur of performative sadness went around the table. "It has been hard," Dad continued, his voice dipping into a practiced somber tone. "But we move forward. That is the Walker way. And to that end, I want everyone to stay tomorrow morning. We are going to have a family meeting at 9 o'clock. He paused, letting the importance land. "I will be settling the final details of the estate," he said. "I want to honor Mom's wishes transparently, in front of everyone. Mason has been working tirelessly to ensure everything is structured exactly as she wanted it." Mason nodded solemnly from his right hand. "It is what she would have wanted. Dad, stability." I sat 3 seats down, staring at my empty plate. The lies were so smooth, so polished. Transparency, stability. He was inviting them to watch him rob me. "It is a complex estate." Mason's wife, Paige, chimed in. She was sitting next to Mason, her hand resting ostensibly on his arm. She was wearing pearls that were likely a gift from Dad. "Derek is taking on such a burden managing it all. Honestly, it is a relief he is the one doing it. I mean, can you imagine if it was left to someone less established?" She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. Her eyes flicked to me for a fraction of a second, then back to Dad. It was a coached line. I knew it. Mason had probably rehearsed it with her in the car. "Make sure you mention that Derek is the only one capable." The table went quiet. Everyone knew who "less established" meant. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I didn't let it reach my face. I picked up my wine glass, swirled the red liquid, and set it back down. "So," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Dad turned his head slowly to look at me. "So," I repeated, meeting his gaze, "you are saying Grandma left me nothing?" The question hung over the table. It was too direct. It was too rude for a Walker dinner table. "You were supposed to hint. You were supposed to manipulate. You were not supposed to ask." Dad's smile didn't vanish, but it changed. The warmth evaporated, leaving only a serrated edge. He looked at me with the eyes of a predator who realizes the prey isn't running. "Melody," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we will discuss the details tomorrow. This is dinner. Let's not make it about money." "I am not making it about money," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "I am making it about wishes. You said you are honoring her wishes. I am just clarifying if her wish was to leave her granddaughter with zero." Aunt Linda coughed nervously. Uncle Steve suddenly found his potatoes very interesting. "You are being dramatic," Mason snapped. "See? This is exactly why we need the meeting. You get emotional and you don't listen." "I am listening perfectly," I said. Dad leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "You will get what is appropriate. Melody, now, drop it." He didn't ask. He ordered. I held his gaze for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. "Okay," I said. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the stuffing. It tasted like ash. Dad relaxed, leaning back in his chair. He thought he had won again. He thought I had folded. He turned back to Uncle Steve and launched into a story about his golf handicap. The table exhaled. The laughter resumed. But I saw Riley watching me from the other end of the table. She raised her glass just an inch. A tiny, imperceptible salute. Dad drank his wine, basking in the noise of his family, confident that the script was back on track. He didn't know that I wasn't playing a role anymore. I was just waiting for the curtain to rise on the final act. And tomorrow, when the lights came up, he wouldn't be the one writing the lines. The brandy had been poured, and the air in the living room was heavy with the scent of cigar smoke and vanilla. I had retreated to the sunroom, hoping to ride out the rest of the evening in relative invisibility. But invisibility was not a luxury Derek Walker granted to his targets. "Melody!" His voice did not boom this time. It cracked like a whip across the open floor plan. It was the tone he used when a dog peed on the carpet or when a waiter brought him the wrong vintage. It demanded immediate presence. I walked into the main living room, The layout had changed since dinner. My father was standing in front of the fireplace, his back to the roaring flames, casting a long shadow across the Persian rug. Mason was seated to his right, looking sullen and tragically misunderstood, swirling his drink. The rest of the family, 30 aunts, uncles, and cousins, were arranged on the sofas and chairs in a semicircle, facing the hearth. It was not a family gathering anymore. It was a courtroom, and I was the defendant. "Stand there," Dad said, pointing to a spot on the rug in the center of the room, "where everyone can see you." I walked to the spot. I did not slouch. I did not cross my arms. I stood with my weight evenly distributed. My hands relaxed at my sides. A forensic auditor knows that body language is the first tell. If you look guilty, people assume you are hiding something. I had nothing to hide. "We have a problem," Dad began, addressing the room rather than me. He looked at Uncle Steve, then at Aunt Linda, gathering their attention like a preacher. "We try to have a nice holiday. We try to honor my mother's memory. And what do I get? Disrespect." He turned his eyes to me. They were hard, glassy with drink and adrenaline. "Mason tells me you threatened him in the hallway before dinner," Dad said. The lie was so bold, so completely inverted from reality, that for a second I almost admired the audacity. Mason, who had cornered me, Mason, who had tried to intimidate me. "I did not threaten him," I said. My voice was calm, distinct. "We had a conversation. He says you threatened to blow up the estate planning," Dad continued, talking over me. "He says you are angry because you think you deserve more money, that you are jealous of his position." "That is not what happened," I said. I did not explain. I did not offer the true version. Explaining to a narcissist is like feeding blood to a shark. It only encourages the frenzy. "Don't lie to me," Dad shouted, stepping forward. The room flinched. "I saw the look on your face at dinner. Everyone did. You sit there with your sour expression, judging this family, judging me. You think you are better than us because you live in the city? Because you have your little career chasing after other people's mistakes?" He was circling me now, pacing back and forth. "You are ruining this holiday," he spat. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. Greed. That is all it is. Ugly, naked greed." I felt a flash of heat in my chest at the mention of Grandma, but I pushed it down. Statue. I thought, let him scream at the stone. My silence was unnerving him. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to scream back so he could point and say, "See? She is hysterical." But I just watched him. I watched the vein pulse in his neck. I watched the way his hands shook slightly. He needed a reaction. He needed to win. And since I wasn't giving him a fight, he decided to give me a punishment. He stopped pacing. He stood directly in front of me, looming, using every inch of his height to make me feel small. "You know what?" he said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried to the back of the room. "I am done treating you like an adult. If you act like a spoiled child, I will treat you like one." He smiled. It was a cruel, tight expression. "You are grounded," he said. He let the words hang there. "You are grounded," he repeated, louder this time. "Go to your room. You are not to leave this house. You are not to come down for breakfast until you are ready to apologize to your brother and to me in front of this entire family. Give me your car keys." He held out his hand. I did not move. "Give them to me," he barked. "No," I said. The room gasped. Aunt Linda put a hand to her throat. "I am 34 years old," I said. "I am not giving you my keys, and I am not apologizing for things I did not do." Dad laughed. He turned to the audience, his arms wide. "You hear this? You hear the arrogance?" He looked at them, silently demanding their support, and they gave it to him. Uncle Bob let out a chuckle. Then a cousin in the back laughed. It started as a trickle and became a wave. They weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because it was safe. Laughing with Derek meant you weren't the target. Laughing meant you were on the winning side. I scanned their faces. I saw fear in Aunt Linda's eyes even as she smiled. I saw relief on Mason's face. I saw the blank, glazed look of my mother, who had learned decades ago that silence was survival. They didn't hate me. They were just trapped in his orbit, obeying the laws of his gravity because they didn't know how to float. The laughter grew louder, a jagged, ugly sound that filled the high ceilings of the room. Dad basked in it. He looked at me with triumph, his eyes shining. I own them. His look said, "And I own you." I looked him in the eye. I didn't blink. "Okay," I said. The word cut through the laughter. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a submission. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock. It was the sound of a door shutting forever. The laughter faltered. Dad frowned, unsure of the tone. "Okay," I said again. "I will go to my room." I turned my back on him. I didn't wait for dismissal. I walked past Mason, who refused to meet my eye. I walked past Riley, who was staring at her shoes, her knuckles white around her glass. I walked up the stairs, the sound of their forced amusement fading behind me. I entered my childhood bedroom and closed the door. I didn't lock it this time. There was no need. I moved quickly. I grabbed my bag from under the bed. I packed the few clothes I had taken out. I checked under the mattress and retrieved the clean packet folder. I put my laptop in its case. I looked around the room, the beige walls, the trophies on the shelf from high school debates I had won to please him. It was a shrine to a girl who didn't exist anymore. I walked over to the nightstand. The framed photo of Grandma June was there. She was smiling, standing in her garden, wearing a sun hat. I picked it up. I looked at it for a long moment. "Watch this," I whispered to her. I placed the photo back on the nightstand. But I placed it face down. It was a signal. It was a message that the next time this room was entered, the old world would be dead. I didn't go out the bedroom door. I wasn't going to walk past them again. I opened the window. The roof of the porch was just below. I had climbed out this way a dozen times when I was 16. I swung my legs over the sill, the cold night air hitting my face. I lowered myself onto the shingles, gripping the frame, and slid down to the edge. It was an easy drop to the hydrangeas below. I landed softly in the mulch. The house was blazing with light above me. I could hear music now. Sinatra. Dad was celebrating. I kept to the shadows, moving along the hedge line toward the garage. I didn't have to worry about the keys. I had a spare set in my purse, and I had never given him the main set. I slipped into the driver's seat of my sedan. I didn't start the engine immediately. I sat in the dark, watching the silhouette of my father through the living room window. He was holding court, gesturing with his glass, the king of a crumbling castle. I pulled out my phone. The screen was bright in the darkness. I dialed Graham. He answered on the first ring. "Melody?" "He did it," I said. My voice was steady, cold. "He grounded me. He humiliated me. He thinks I am upstairs crying." "Are you?" Graham asked. "No," I said. "I am in the driveway." I started the car. The engine purred to life, quiet and efficient. I was sitting in a booth at a 24-hour diner 3 miles from the estate, nursing a black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My phone lay on the table, silent, face up. I was not there to see the first act of the morning play out. But I did not need to be. I knew the players. I knew the stage. And thanks to Riley, who recounted every second of it to me later with journalistic precision, I knew exactly how the curtain rose. At 7:30 in the morning, my father marched up the stairs. He did not walk. He ascended. He was wearing his robe, the silk one he only wore when he felt particularly regal, and he was already rehearsing the benevolent forgiveness speech he planned to deliver. He expected to find a broken woman. He expected to find me huddled under the covers, swollen-eyed and sufficiently shamed, ready to trade my dignity for a seat at his breakfast table. He did not knock. In Derek Walker's house, doors were merely suggestions. He twisted the knob and pushed the door open, prepared to demand an apology. What he found was a vacuum. The room was aggressively empty. The bed was made, the sheets pulled tight with military precision, undisturbed. The closet door stood open. revealing bare hangers that rattled softly in the draft from the window I had left cracked open. There was no suitcase. There were no clothes. There was no Melody. Riley told me he stood there for a full minute, unable to process the data. His narrative required a villain, or at least a victim, and I had denied him both. He stepped into the room, looking for a note, a tear-stained letter begging for his mercy. He found nothing. Then, his eyes landed on the nightstand. I had left only one thing behind, the silver-framed photograph of Grandma June. It was the only personal object remaining in the room. I had not taken it, but I had not left it as it was. I had turned it face down on the mahogany surface. It was a small gesture, but it hit him harder than a scream. It was a rejection. It was Grandma turning her back on him. Riley said his face went a mottled, ugly red. He reached out to flip it over, then stopped, his hand hovering. He didn't touch it. He couldn't. He turned on his heel and stormed back downstairs. In the dining room, the family was gathering for the mandatory meeting. Cousins were shuffling in, nursing hangovers and cups of coffee, sensing the electricity in the air. When Dad entered, the room went quiet. "She ran away," Dad announced. He didn't sound worried. He sounded vindicated. He sounded like a man who had just won a bet. "Melody is gone, cleared out in the middle of the night like a thief." A ripple of shock went through the room. Aunt Linda gasped. "That settles it," Dad continued, smoothing the lapels of his robe. "I knew she was unstable. This proves it. She couldn't handle the reality of the situation, so she fled." Mason was sitting at the head of the table, organizing a stack of papers. When Dad made the announcement, Mason smirked. It was a quick, involuntary twitch of the lips, relief washing over him. He thought his problem had solved itself. He thought the unstable sister had lived up to the lie he had written in his email. "We will proceed with the reading as planned," Dad said, clapping his hands together. "In fact, it simplifies things. Her absence acts as a tacit consent to our restructuring. We will record that she chose not to attend." He was already spinning it. He was already building the fortress over my empty grave. Then, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite chime. It was a long, sustained press. The room stilled in stages. The cousins near the window looked out, their faces confused. It was not a delivery truck. It was a black sedan. Dad frowned. "Who is that? I told the staff no interruptions." The front door opened. The housekeeper didn't even have time to announce the guest. Graham Sutter stepped into the foyer. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my car, and he carried a leather briefcase like it contained a verdict. He didn't look at the relatives. He didn't look at Mason. He looked straight at Derek. Dad's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. He assumed Graham was there to help. He assumed Graham was part of the team. "Graham," Dad said, forcing a smile, though it looked tight. "You are early, and you weren't invited to the breakfast. This is a private family moment." Graham walked past the threshold. He stopped in the center of the archway, framing himself against the morning light. He looked at my father with an expression of profound, terrifying disappointment. "Mr. Walker," Graham said. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the silent house. "What have you done?" The question hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't a legal question. It was a moral accusation. It implied that Graham knew something, that he knew I was missing, and that he held Derek responsible. Dad bristled. The color rose in his neck. "Excuse me? I haven't done anything. Melody ran away. She's having one of her episodes." "I see," Graham said. He looked around the room, making eye contact with Riley. Then Mason. Mason stopped smirking. Mason went very, very pale. "You need to leave," Dad snapped, his authority fraying at the edges. "This is a private residence. If you don't leave, I will call the police." "The police," Graham repeated. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just tightened his grip on the handle of his briefcase. "That won't be necessary. Derek, not yet." Graham checked his watch. "I am here to represent the interests of the estate," Graham said calmly. The reading is scheduled for 9 o'clock. I will return then. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. And Mr. Walker? Graham added. I won't be returning alone. He walked out the door, leaving it open. The cold morning air rushed into the warm house, chilling the room. Dad stood there, staring at the open door. The silence in the room was absolute. For the first time all weekend, nobody was laughing. In the diner, 3 miles away, I watched the minute hand on my watch tick forward. 8:55. I stood up, threw a $5 bill on the table, and walked out to my car. It was time to go home, at 9 o'clock sharp. The front door of the Walker estate opened. I did not slam it. I did not creep in. I walked through the foyer with the steady, rhythmic click of my heels on the marble acting as my announcement. Graham Sutter walked half a step behind me, a silent sentinel in a charcoal suit. We reached the archway of the dining room just as my father was clearing his throat. The room was packed. 30 relatives were squeezed into chairs and lining the walls, holding coffee cups like they were at a town hall meeting. Derek stood at the head of the table, holding a single sheet of printer paper. It was flimsy. It was informal. It was his version of the truth. So, Derek was saying, adjusting his reading glasses. To simplify things, Mason will step in to manage everything as the primary executor. It is a heavy burden, but he is ready. As for Melody, despite her absence, we have decided to set aside a small gesture, a one-time gift of $5,000 to help with her situation. You can keep the $5,000, I said. My voice was not loud, but in the hush of the room, it carried like a bell. 30 heads turned in unison. My father froze, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Mason, who had been nodding solemnly next to him, looked up, his eyes widening as they landed not on me, but on the man standing behind me. I walked into the room, keeping my coat on. I clutched the black folder against my chest. I did not look at my aunts or my cousins. I looked directly at Derek. Melody, Dad said, recovering his composure with a tight, pained smile. You came back. I assume this means you are ready to apologize? If you want to join this family meeting, you can start by telling everyone where you went and why you felt the need to cause such a scene. No, I said, stopping at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. I am not here to apologize, Dad, and I am not here for a family meeting. I am here for the truth. I stepped aside, allowing Graham to move forward. He placed his briefcase on the table. The sound of the heavy leather hitting the wood was the only noise in the room. Who is this? Aunt Linda whispered loudly. This is Graham Sutter, I said. He is the family attorney. He is my attorney, Derek snapped, his face reddening. And this is a private reading, Graham. You have no business interrupting. Graham did not look at Derek. He clicked the latches of his briefcase open. Snap, snap, and lifted the lid. He pulled out a thick bound document with a blue cover, sealing the air with the scent of officialdom. Actually, Derek, Graham said, his voice calm and terrifyingly professional. I was your mother's attorney for 40 years, and this is not a private reading. This is the execution of a trust, and you are right about one thing. It is time to read the actual documents, not the summary you typed up this morning. Graham slid the document down the center of the table. It spun slowly and came to a stop in front of Mason. Mason stared at it like it was a live grenade. Reveal number 1, Graham stated, looking at the room. The house. He pulled a deed from his briefcase. Derek has led you to believe that this property passed to him upon June's death, Graham said. That is incorrect. June Walker placed this estate into a protective trust 20 years ago. Derek has a life estate, meaning he is allowed to live here, but he does not own the bricks, he does not own the land, and he certainly cannot sell it. Graham pointed a finger at me. The deed lists a single trustee with the power to manage, sell, or maintain the property, Graham said. That trustee is Melody Walker. A gasp went around the room. Dad gripped the back of his chair. That is a lie. She is incompetent. She is unstable. The law does not care about your opinion of her stability. Graham countered smoothly. It cares about signatures, which brings us to reveal number 2. Graham pulled out a second document. This one was stamped with the logo of Ridgeway Trust and Savings. The Walker Family Education Endowment. Graham read, $3 million set aside for the grandchildren. You told the family you were moving it to a new LLC for better management. You filed paperwork yesterday to initiate that transfer. Graham paused, letting the weight of the words settle. However, he continued, you filed that paperwork claiming that the co-trustee, Melody, was missing and unreachable. You swore under penalty of perjury that you made diligent efforts to locate her. Graham produced a printout of a text log. Melody texted you 3 times last week, Graham said. She was at your dinner table last night. Filing a court document with a knowingly false declaration is not management. Derek, it is perjury. The room was dead silent. The relatives were not laughing anymore. They were looking from Derek to me. Seeing the shift in gravity, the king was losing his crown in real time. But that is not the worst of it, I said, speaking up for the first time. I opened my folder. I took out the email Mason had sent. I took out the loan application Graham had subpoenaed that morning. Show them the third thing. Graham, I said. Graham pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a loan application for a line of credit, secured against the house. At the bottom, there were 2 signatures. One was Derek's. The other was a shaky, looped scrawl that purported to be mine, the necessary authorization from the trustee. This was submitted to the bank 4 days ago, Graham said. It attempts to leverage the house for a $500,000 business loan. It requires the signature of the trustee. Graham looked at Mason. Mason, Graham said gently, almost kindly, you are a lawyer. You know what we call it when someone signs a name that isn't theirs on a federal loan application? Mason went white. He didn't just look scared. He looked sick. He looked like a man watching his entire future dissolve. I didn't sign it, Mason whispered, his voice cracking. Dad, I told you I wouldn't sign it. Shut up, Mason, Dad roared, slamming his hand on the table. This is a setup. She forged it. She is trying to frame me. We have an affidavit from a forensic document examiner, Graham interrupted, his voice cutting through Dad's shouting like a razor. And we have the bank's compliance log. The application was uploaded from the IP address in this house, from a computer registered to Derek Walker, at a time when Melody was at her office in Philadelphia. We have the login timestamps. Graham placed the affidavit on top of the pile. This is not a family dispute anymore, Graham said. This is bank fraud. This is identity theft. And because the loan amount exceeds a certain threshold, it is a federal crime. Mason stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. He looked at Dad, then at me. The smirk from the morning was gone, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a man who realizes he is about to be disbarred. I didn't know he submitted it, Mason stammered, looking at me. Melody, look, I wrote the email about the restructure, yes, but I told him the loan was too risky. I told him we needed your consent. I didn't touch that application. You knew, I said cold and steady. You knew he was leveraging the house. You saw the email. You helped him draft the narrative that I was unstable to cover his tracks. I was just following instructions, Mason yelled, his polished corporate veneer cracking into pieces. He is my father. He told me it was the only way to save the business. Mason, Dad shouted. Sit down. No, Mason yelled back, backing away from the table. I am not going to prison for your debt. Dad, I have a license. I have a firm. The room erupted. Aunts were whispering frantically. Uncle Steve was standing up, looking like he wanted to leave. My mother was sitting with her hands over her mouth, staring at Derek as if she had never seen him before. Derek Walker stood alone at the head of the table. The single sheet of paper he had held, his homemade summary, fluttered from his hand and landed on the floor. It looked pathetic next to the stack of certified evidence Graham had laid out. Dad looked at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see anger in his eyes. I saw fear. He looked at the documents, then at the relatives who were no longer an audience, but a jury. Melody, he said, his voice trembling. Sweetheart, let's go to the other room. We can explain this. We can fix this. No, I said. We are done fixing things. I looked at the family. The reading is concluded, I announced. Graham and I will be petitioning the court to remove Derek as the beneficiary for cause. The house is secure. The endowment is secure. And from this moment on, nobody touches a dime of Grandma's legacy without going through me. I turned to Graham. Pack it up. As Graham closed his briefcase, the click of the latches sounded like a gavel banging down. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving my father standing in the wreckage of the kingdom he thought he owned. The silence he had used to control us for so long was finally, beautifully, broken. The silence in the dining room was not the empty kind. It was heavy, filled with the sudden, suffocating realization that the Emperor was not only naked, but had been stealing the clothes off our backs for years. Graham Sutter did not give the room time to recover. He stood by the table, his hand resting on the stack of evidence like a cornerstone. Here is what happens next, Graham stated, his voice devoid of emotion. By noon today, I will be filing an emergency petition with the probate court to remove Derek Walker from any administrative role regarding the Walker estate. We are freezing all actions. We are freezing the accounts. And we are opening a formal forensic review of every single filing made in the last 60 days. He looked at Mason, who was currently staring at his shoes as if hoping they would open a portal to another dimension. That includes a review of all notarized signatures, Graham added. My father looked at the documents, then at the faces of his brothers and sisters. He saw the shift. He saw the moment his audience became his judge. He realized that anger would not work. Intimidation would not work. So he reached for the only tool he had left. He reached for love, or at least, his version of it. His shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with tears that looked remarkably practiced. He took a step toward me, reaching out a trembling hand to touch my arm. Melody, sweetheart, he said, his voice cracking with a tenderness that made my skin crawl. Please, you have to understand. I did this for us. I did this for the family. The business is in a tight spot. I was just trying to protect the legacy your grandmother built. I was trying to protect you. He looked at the room, pleading for sympathy. I grounded you because I was scared, he whispered, wiping a tear. I was scared you would get hurt by the weight of all this. It was not punishment. It was protection. The room wavered. I could see Aunt Linda softening. I could see the confusion on my mother's face. He was good. He was so incredibly good at rewriting history while the ink was still wet. I stepped back, letting his hand fall into the empty air between us. No, I said. I looked him in the eye, and for the first time, I saw him not as a giant, but as a small, frightened man terrified of losing his stage. Control isn't care, Dad, I said, my voice steady and clear. It is just fear wearing a smile. The sentence hung there. It stripped the varnish right off the antique furniture. Aunt Linda straightened up. She looked at Derek, really looked at him, and the pity in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold realization. Derek, Uncle Steve said from the back of the room. It was the first time in 10 years I had heard him speak without asking for permission. Did you really sign her name? Did you really leverage Mom's house? Dad turned, his eyes darting. Steve, it is complicated. The liquidity, it is not complicated. Riley's voice cut in from the corner. She stepped forward, standing next to me. It is theft. You tried to steal her inheritance because you broke your own business. We can discuss this privately, Mason stammered, standing up and trying to button his jacket with shaking hands. Let's go to the study. Just family. We don't need the lawyers. No, Graham said. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He just blocked the path with his presence. You wanted a family meeting. Mason, you wanted a public reading. This happened publicly. The truth stays public. There was no retreat. There was no backroom deal. The illusion shattered completely. My mother stood up. She walked over to the table and picked up the loan application Graham had left there. She looked at the forged signature. Then she looked at Derek. She didn't say a word. She just dropped the paper back onto the table and walked out of the room. That was the end of Derek Walker's reign. The legal outcome was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, a judge granted the emergency petition. Derek was removed as executor. The assets were frozen and transferred to the protected trust Grandma had established. The attempt to leverage the house was flagged as fraudulent. And while I chose not to press federal charges for the sake of my mother, the bank permanently blacklisted Derek and Mason. Mason's firm placed him on indefinite administrative leave pending an ethics review, but the personal outcome was the one that mattered. 2 weeks later, I sent a letter to my father. It was not an email. It was a physical letter, delivered by courier. It outlined the new terms of our existence. I would manage the estate. I would ensure Mom was taken care of. But I would not attend his dinners. I would not sit in his audience. If he wanted to see me, he could call and ask. And if I was busy, the answer would be no. There would be no more performances. On the day the final court order was signed, Graham met me at the house in Pine Hollow. The driveway was quiet. Dad was staying at a hotel in the city, giving everyone space, which was code for hiding from the shame. Graham handed me a set of keys. Then, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax. "She gave me this 3 years ago," Graham said softly. "She had specific instructions. She said, 'Give this to Melody only if Derek tries to humiliate her in front of the family. If he plays nice, burn it. But if he tries to break her, give her the letter.'" I took the envelope. My hands were shaking. I walked into the garden, to the bench where Grandma used to sit and watch the birds. The winter air was crisp. I broke the seal and unfolded the paper. My darling Melody. If you are reading this, then he did it. He tried to make you feel small to make himself feel big. I am sorry I'm not there to stand beside you, but I know you. I know that you have a spine made of steel, even if you wrap it in velvet. He will try to ground you. He will try to trap you in that room and tell you that you are a child. But listen to me. If he grounded you, it means he is terrified of your freedom. It means he knows that the moment you walk out that door, he loses. If he grounded you, it means you are finally free. Take the house, plant the sunflowers, and never let him interrupt you again. Love, Grandma. I lowered the letter. The tears came then, hot and fast. But they were not tears of grief. They were tears of release. She had known. She had seen the future, and she had handed me the map to navigate it. I wiped my face and stood up. I walked back to the house. I climbed the steps to the front porch. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a smooth, heavy click. I pushed the door open. The house was quiet. It smelled of dust and old memories. But the air felt different. It didn't feel like a museum of Derek Walker's ego anymore. It felt like a blank canvas. I walked into the study. I pulled the heavy velvet drapes open, letting the sunlight flood the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I looked at the empty desk where my father used to sit and command the world. I didn't sit in his chair. I pulled it away and dragged a smaller, comfortable armchair from the corner to the window, facing the garden. I was going to fix the garden first. I would tear out the rigid, manicured hedges he loved and plant wild sunflowers, messy and bright and impossible to control. Then I would fix the study. I would fill it with books, not contracts. I wasn't doing it to punish him. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it because for the first time in 34 years, I didn't need permission to exist. I sat down in the chair, watching the sun dip below the tree line. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It was full of me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Melody's journey. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and support us further by hitting the hype button so this story can reach even more people.